From the moment of its invention, abstract art has been notable for the range and diversity of its artistic approaches. In most chronologies, wholly abstract art in the West begins just before World War I, emerging within the wider context of the modernist search for new forms in artistic, spiritual, political, and scientific systems at the beginnings of the 20th century. One of the first to explore complete abstraction in painting was Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky, who developed a philosophy in which he espoused that line, form, and especially color can evoke certain emotional and psychological responses, even when used non-representationally. It was Kandinsky who conveyed through his paintings and in such writings as his Concerning the Spiritual in Art, published in 1912, that artists should seek inspiration from the imagination and their innermost feelings, rather than responding to that perceived in the world around him. In a rapidly modernizing world that had recently discovered such invisible forces as X-rays and electromagnetic fields, Kandinsky sought to translate vital and emotional energies into visual form. He was particularly attracted to and influenced by music, and the idea that music could elicit an emotional response without being tied to recognizable subject matter. He painted Impression 3, which you see here, immediately after having attended a concert in Munich of Austrian composer Arnold Schoenberg's music, which radically challenged traditional notions of harmony. In Kandinsky's painting, the black piano and audience are clearly evident, but it is most of all through the expansive areas of yellow that the artist conveyed the visceral and emotional effect that Schoenberg's radical music had on him that evening. Kandinsky began to see the way that colors related to one another as analogous to sequences of chords in music, and often titled his works using terms associated with music. Soon after his encounter with Schoenberg's music, Kandinsky would strip away all recognizable imagery from his work, leaving only vibrant colors and dynamic forms, in hopes of stimulating emotional responses in the viewer and to create a new visual language that carried a profound sensory impact. In Black Lines, for example, which you see here, bright orbs of color and animated lines vibrate and produce a dynamic force suited, as Kandinsky would have it, as much to the soul as to the eye. Around this time, another Russian artist, Kazimir Malevich, working independently of Kandinsky, also rejected the illusions of representational painting and instead developed an abstract style in which brightly colored shapes float within a white space and in a dynamic relationship to one another. In such works as Suprematist Composition, Airplane Flying, Malevich sought the pure language of shape and color, to which he believed everyone could respond intuitively and be transported beyond the materiality of the everyday world. At about this same time, American artist Arthur Dove would, after a stay in Europe from 1907 to 1910, return to New York and create paintings in which he sought to express through shape and color nature's spirit or essence, capturing the splendor, the rhythms, and the pulsating energy of the landscapes near his home in upstate New York. In the years immediately following World War I, the Dutch painter Piet Mondrian would work to distill his formal vocabulary to the three primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, three primary values, black, white, and gray, and vertical and horizontal lines, to create what he believed to be compositions whose internal cohesion and harmony expressed a universal cosmic order and beauty. I think that these few select examples show just how rapidly a change of differing and at times competing ideas and manifestations of abstract painting appeared in the first few decades of the 20th century. And indeed, the importance that abstract art in general would eventually assume between the wars became clear in a diagram drawn by MoMA director Alfred H. Barr for the catalog cover of a 1936 exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, in which Barr proposed that the history of modern art to that point effectively culminates in abstract art. But even in 1936, Barr's corralling of abstract art into either the geometrical or the non-geometrical already seemed too neat and too tidy to capture the varied forms and approaches that were unfolding in the art world around him. And in the several decades since Barr's diagram, abstract art has taken diverse routes and countless manifestations. from outdoor earthworks to collage, from light and sound projections to web pages. Indeed, digital content and industrial and post-industrial processes now exist comfortably alongside and expand the very possibilities of traditional abstraction. A sense of this extraordinary variety that exists 100 years after Kandinsky is evident, I think, in the Sensory Impact show upstairs, and is undoubtedly reflected in the work of the panelists assembled here this evening, to whom I would like to now turn. To get the discussion started this evening, I asked each panelist to speak briefly about, simply put, what abstract art means to them, which is something of a reprise of a question originally posed in 1951 to a number of prominent artists, including 2 representatives of the American Abstract Artists Organization, on the occasion of a symposium on abstract art at the Museum of Modern Art. So it seems only appropriate to get some updated responses from our own luminaries. Thank you. So let me begin by just introducing the panel. To my left, I have Phillis Ideal, who received her MFA from the University of California, Berkeley. Her paintings are richly layered with a mixture of color, gestural brushstrokes, and collaged elements embedded in medium, computer graphics, and shards of other drawings. Phillis's compositions and color palettes evolved during her process of experimentation in the artist's studio, in which she conflates and references many art historical movements and tendencies, from abstract expressionism and color field to minimalism and beyond, to produce her own visual language. Phillis considers her paintings to be moments in an open process, one that experiments with both formal relationships and chance elements to create meaning and elicit a range of responses in the viewer. Phillis is exhibited in major museums and galleries in San Francisco, Santa Fe, and New York City. Her work has been shown and collected in many private, corporate, and public collections, such as the De Young Museum in San Francisco, the Oakland Museum of Fine Arts, Newport Harbor Art Museum, and Fine Arts Museum of Santa Fe. Her work has also been exhibited in Otranto, Italy, Berlin, Germany, and Paris, France. And she has taught at San Francisco State, UC Berkeley, and Sarah Lawrence. Next to Phillis is Alice Adams, who is known for her sculpture and site-specific land art in the 1970s, and since the mid-1980s for her major public art projects in transit systems, airports, university campuses, and other urban sites throughout the United States. Alice graduated from Columbia University with a BFA in painting and went on to study tapestry weaving and design at the National School of Decorative Arts in Aubusson, France. Upon her return to the United States, her artistic practice soon evolved from tapestry making to sculpture, and by the late 1970s, Alice was constructing large-scale, site-specific installations. Since 1986, she has developed major permanent public projects, most notably the Roundabout in downtown Philadelphia, Scroll Circle on the University of Delaware campus in Newark, Delaware, and Beaded Circle Crossing in the Denver International Airport. Her early sculptural work was included in the now famous 1966 exhibition, Eccentric Abstraction, curated by Lucy Lepard, as well as in surveys of contemporary sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art and in the Whitney Museum Biennials in 1971 and 1973. In 2000, a comprehensive survey of Alice's public projects took place at the Lehman College Art Gallery. Next to Alice is Stephen Westfall, who received his MFA in 1978 from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and has his first solo exhibition in 1984 at Tracy Garrett in New York City. Subsequent exhibitions of Stephen's work were held at Daniel Newberg Gallery and Andre Emmerich Gallery in New York, as well as shows in Munich, Germany, St. Gallen, Switzerland, and Paris, France. Since 1997, Stephen has been represented in New York by Lenin Weinberg and has had 6 exhibitions at their gallery locations in Soho and Chelsea. Stephen's work has been included in several important survey exhibitions of abstract painting, including shows at the Museum of Modern Art in Saint-Étienne, France in 1997, and the 1991 show Conceptual Abstraction at Sydney Janis Gallery, as well as the revisitation of that Janus Gallery exhibition that took place at the Hunter College Art Gallery in 2012. Survey exhibitions of Stephen's work have taken place at Western Carolina University in 1999 and at Colgate University in 2000. In 2014, he created large-scale wall paintings at the Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University, Art Omi in Ghent, New York, and at Kunstgalerie Bonn in Bonn, Germany. Stephen's work can be found in the collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Kemper Museum in Kansas City, the Louisiana Museum in Denmark, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. He is currently a professor at the Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University and in the graduate program at Bard University. Christine Berry is the co-founder of Berry Campbell Gallery in Chelsea, New York. Christine earned her bachelor's degree in art history from Baylor University in Texas and her master's in art history and museum studies from the University of North Texas. She has worked at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth and the Whitney Museum of American Art here in New York, and was the director at a major Midtown gallery for over 10 years. Christine opened Berry Campbell Gallery with Martha Campbell in 2013. The gallery features post-war modern and contemporary art with a focus on established and mid-career contemporary artists. Berry Campbell represents the estates of American abstract artist founders Balcom and Gertrude Green, Raymond Hendler, Stephen Pace, and Albert Statler, and such artists as John Goodyear, Jill Nathanson, Susan Vexey, who's with us here tonight, James Walsh, and past American abstract artist member Edwin Ruda. The exhibition, Albert Stadler, Deviant Variations, Paintings from the 1960s, is currently on view at Berry Campbell Gallery until October 11th, and the show Stephen Pace, Abstract Expressionist, opens October 16th. And finally, Stephen Maine has exhibited his work in a variety of venues in the United States and Europe. His art criticism and journalism has appeared in such publications as Art in America, Artnet.com magazine, Art News, The New York Sun, Art on Paper, Hyperallergic, and Artillery magazine. And he is a contributing editor at artcritical.com. In 2000, Stephen received a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Painting and was a resident fellow at Yaddo in Saratoga Springs in 2012. At present, Stephen teaches in the Fine Arts Department at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. Stephen Maine Paintings, a solo exhibition of Stephen's new work, opens Friday, September 26th at Melville House in Brooklyn and continues to the end of 2014. And his work can also be seen in Doppler Shift, a group show at the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey in Summit, New Jersey, which opens on September 28th and continues through January 16th of 2015. So to open up the discussion, I would like to begin, I suppose, first with Phillis, and to respond to that initial prompt about what abstract art means to her and to the rest of the panelists. And then we'll go from there and have a lively discussion about the current state of abstract art and the various responses that are represented by the panelists that I have at the table with me. So Phillis.
Okay,
please.
thank you. For me, abstraction is about freedom of expression and the spirit of improvisation. It is call and response, the creative process incarnate. It makes itself up as it goes along and is created on the spot. It is about taking risks with your own rules that can be forever changing. Abstraction is a personal journey that gets off the beaten path and explores new twists and turns. It takes away the dust of ordinary life. I feel there's a surprising intimacy at the heart of abstraction. It's a beauty hard won and a fresh underscoring of individual interpretation. A painting or sculpture has a face of its own as it develops along one's lines, but ends up feeding the universal spirit, becoming more than the sum of its parts. It is both secular and spiritual. It speaks to the eternal. I think improvisation has been a part of American life. always breaking from the past, Europe, Victorian mores, and currently more global concerns through the connection of the internet. We are always led into what is next.
Thank you, Phyllis.
You're welcome.
Alice.
Before I talk about what abstraction means to me, I just wanted to talk about how the American abstract artists has been very important to me. I've been a member since the early 60s, I think. And it's always provided, I mean, I've been active at sometimes, and other times I couldn't be as active because of travel, because of my work. But when I first joined, I believe I was invited by Leo Rabkin or Henry Pearson. There are a number of the artists at that time. But one of the things that was very important to me was how many interesting and important women artists that were part of the group. And I remember meeting Alice Mason and Esfira Slobodkina. I don't know if any of you knew them. But, and then there were artists like Charmian von Weigand, and there was Jean Miles, another artist. And C. Roser, of course, has been a member probably as long as I have been. And I always thought that was very interesting in a political sense. Also in a political sense, being a member of a group of artists represents a kind of independence for artists. So it's provided a kind of a way of artists showing their work, whether they were showing elsewhere or not, or at the same time, any of these things. It provided a kind of a shelter in a way, or a gathering in a way. I also was interesting the first group founders of American abstract artists, there were about 8 or 9 women. It was in 1930. That's kind of interesting for that time. Maybe more than now are able to show. So that I thought. So anyway, I did want to say that. It's also a tribute to the men who are members that they didn't have any kind of feeling one way or the other. Everybody was pretty much the same. As far as what abstraction means to me, it's always been I've always seen it in a very wide sense. Although I was just looking at the Mondrian painting there with this kind of framework of black lines, and it's sort of akin to the first sculpture of mine that was shown, which had to do with a framework, actually, of very large wood beams. But so it's always been this guiding principle to me of everything that I did, that I kind of pulled it together in a certain way that has to do with abstraction in a very wide sense. But of course, in sculpture, you're into something different because, and particularly for me, I was concerned with people's physical experience. But I think physical experience and emotional experience are all wrapped up together. But many of the things that I make, you really experience by being in the middle of them. So I see it in a very, very wide and all-encompassing sense, and people can take a very minimal view or not. I mean, it's able to contain a number of different directions.
Thank you, Alice. Stephen.
What abstract art means to me. By Stephen Westfall. When I was a kid growing up in San Francisco during the Vietnam era, and I grew up in a white-collar family, there was no possibility of being an artist. Nobody had ever been an artist. As I learned later, I'm synesthetic. not to the extent Kandinsky was, thank God, because then I would, I'd be going to bed for a week with migraines like he had to do. But for decades, I thought that everybody knew that 5 and 3 were sort of yellow and buttery, maybe with an overtone of kind of savory honey, like jasmine-inflected honey or something. That's not true. Most people don't feel that way, but I have that response to, I have cross-sensory response to phenomena. A lot of it's involved with color. And my experience of color is climatological. I can sense the humidity of a color, for instance. And so with all of that, when I would, so we were all, it was San Francisco, the 60s. I was taking my share of LSD, and everybody else was too. But I would peel off from the group and go down to SF MoMA, and I knew we were all going to die at 18, and because it was universal conscription, it wasn't even a draft. And so there was nothing I wanted to do except kind of just maybe live a little bit longer. But I saw a big Gene Davis painting called Cool Buzzsaw, and I saw an Albers painting, Homage to the Square, which were sort of inset and expanding volumes of color as light. And I said, well, if I did want to do something, that looked like something that someone would want to do. And for me, the thing about abstract painting is that the more essential it gets, the more the meanings seem to open up and become multiple. That's a paradox, but it's a paradox that really only happens in abstract art. And because of the relationship to color, I came to painting. I love abstract sculpture. My first teacher was a member of the Bay Area Figurative School, and I love it. I love figuration. But I see abstraction in figuration, and I see associations in abstraction, and I think it's not a hard line, and so I think that whatever brings us to the conversation of painting and sculpture and photography and image making and image crafting, in any way, as long as we're having that conversation, it's wonderful. But I identify with abstract art, and I'm really honored to be a member of this group, the American Abstract Artists Association. And everything that Alice said holds true for me. It's egalitarianism, the interest, the stories that every member has about where they've been and what they've done, I find terribly moving. So it's great to be here.
I'm the art dealer on the panel. So I'm going to say, what does abstract art mean to me currently, having a business that's been open for 1 year? I'm going to say money. So first and foremost, that's what it means to me. I show mostly right now abstract paintings. To me personally, abstract painting, a good abstract painting or work of art can take me somewhere that I can't describe in words. It just nails it. What I love every day for me is someone will walk into the gallery, and whether they are experienced or inexperienced, if I'm showing an Albert Stadler painting or Edward Avedisian, something hard edge or softer, I find that people can lean in, whether they know or they don't know. If you're looking at representational, they may have a connotation. Sometimes when they look at abstract paintings, they want to see a fish or a landscape, and that's okay too. But I love that some people, it allows people to go a little beyond maybe their comfort zone if you can get it right with abstract painting. And I also agree with everybody else. We represent Gertrude and Balcom Green at the gallery, and they are founding members. And I love that Gertrude Green was one, she probably pushed Balcom Green to be such a pure abstractionist and a geometric artist. And I think it's wonderful that the group is so egalitarian and has been so important through the years. And we were fortunate to show Edwin Ruda's paintings while he was still alive, and that photo was him, and it means the world to me. And he remembered all these paintings that we showed from the late 60s and early 70s, and I got to ask him a lot of questions about that, and I know he was an important member to this group.
Yes, he was a wonderful painter as well. For me, becoming an abstract artist meant that I didn't have to learn how to draw a nose and get it to sit on there, and necks. You try to draw a neck ever? It's really hard to do that, and it's a very specialized kind of skill. But when I was in school in the 70s, we were moving out of that. There was some idea that you had to pay for your abstract paintings by taking life drawing. That's no longer the case, I think. But the idea for me at the time was that I could engage with the stuff of everyday life without having to concentrate too hard on this really kind of silly skill. With all respect, it's kind of a ridiculous thing to learn how to do. There's a divide. This is getting kind of musty too, but critics who will say that abstraction is an ivory tower kind of pursuit and divorced from real life, and because you're not engaging with visual signs and symbols and situations of the real world, that you're as an abstract artist, you're disengaged from the real world. And I have found the opposite to be the case. I found that the more I develop the clarity of my thinking about what I really want to do, I find myself more and more engaged with the dust of everyday life. So I'm going to, if I may, ask Phillis about this very interesting comment that you made about abstraction. I think you said shakes or sweeps the dust off everyday life. As someone who likes to collect a lot of everyday dust, I wonder what you meant by that.
I collect a bit of everyday dust too. I think it sometimes just opens up more doors than the humdrum of everyday life. And I also said it can be both spiritual and secular. So it's special.
Is it, it's special, I grant you that, that's why we're all here. Is it, what is its relation to, someone looked at my painting and said gum on the sidewalk, and I love that, I think that's terrific, that blotchy painting. Do you have, what kind of associations do you want the viewer to make with your work, or do you want to even guide the viewer to that extent?
I what?
Guide the viewer. What would you like, if a viewer said to you, oh, that painting reminds me of something that you'd never thought of, would you consider that a successful kind of engagement?
Yeah, I think it opens the door for them. I actually really admire gum in the subway because there's concrete squares, and I like the placement. I mean, it's such a random placement. I think, wow, that really works better than any painting I could have ever done.
Right, so that's that's exactly,
yeah,
that's a great
no,
comment.
I love that. I totally love that. To me, that's a perception that does dust off and bring you back to a kind of clear perception. That is every day, I guess. But some people notice it, some people don't.
Although I have to say that I have to temper people back sometimes because you might be horrified sometimes at what some people may come. I mean, not horrified, but it's good to come. But I think it's also great to explain. Sometimes people need to hear about color relationships and movement and gesture and the energy that comes with that. And if they're open to listening, I think they can get beyond looking at subject. I think they're used to looking for subject matter in paintings. Yeah. And so I think, I think sometimes it's just a little push.
Yeah, and the color in your painting, Stephen, there's cognitive dissonance with even the idea of gum on the sidewalk, because the gum on the sidewalk is almost invariably ABC gum, and so the flavor's gone out of it.
Keep going.
But your colors are just like right out of the Dow chemical assembly line. So
bubble gum.
Yeah, fake lemon number 5 is like absolutely fresh, and so there's the thing. It's like, okay, it's not a formed stick. There's a kind of pattern that's been smeared.
Yeah.
But man, I'd still bite into that.
Yeah.
Whereas I might
We
not
could
bite
talk
into
about
the gum on the
surface then,
sidewalk.
because your surfaces are so pristine, really, so beautifully velvety, pristine. So I think one way that abstract art, maybe painting in particular, we make surfaces. That's the thing that we do. That photographers, printmakers, et cetera,
Well,
don't
this
do.
comes back to representational painting too, because one of the things you learn very early on in representational painting, you guys can all do this. If you make a viewfinder with your
Yeah.
fingers,
Sure.
look around and show me a place in the world, in this room, where your eye's not met by a surface. Try it.
Right, and we're contributing surfaces to that,
that
stockpile.
So
of
what happens
surfaces.
is that the nose aspect that you were, I always used to use that analogy, a nose. I don't know why the nose comes
my
up.
joke. It's my joke.
But I don't know, it's opposite sides of the
Back
coast.
off.
But
Stephen, if I may, just for 1 second, that line between sort of abstraction and figuration, which a number of you touched upon, I'm just curious about. I mean, I know that in your work, and I'm sure Christine in the work that you have in your gallery, there's always this. There's invariably certain, whether the viewer projects onto it or otherwise, there's certain external references that either inspire your works or are sometimes explicit, from tapestries
floors,
to
tapestries,
mosaics to printing
Heraldry.
press halftone aspects. So I wonder if you might speak a little bit about that line between abstraction and figuration, and the degree of that reference to things outside what sometimes seems to be a sort of closed conversation.
I would
to
just
some.
briefly say is once you realize that everything is a surface, and say in a painting, for example, in deference to our sculptor, once you brought the whole surface of perhaps the thing observed, but it could be the thing remembered, as in a sign, up to the actual physical surface of the painting, you have something that is both that's in this very ambiguous place in terms of being illusionistic, but also concrete. And in its concreteness, in a narrative painting where Mary, my best friend Mary, may have assumed subjective primacy. It no longer has subjective primacy. What happens is that the object itself becomes the sign and becomes the image, the whole image, like an icon. And an icon can be abstract or figurative, and a figurative icon carries a lot of abstract content. But an abstract icon is itself a figure in a field. And that's that separateness, that lifting out of that intensification, lifting out of everyday life that Phillis is talking about. But it's resonating with architecture.
Well, which brings us a bit naturally to Alice. I mean, your work and your sculptural work and your installation work, your earthworks have often alluded to architectural forms. And I wonder if you might speak about that divide between these immersive environments of sort of objects in the landscape and the architectural references.
Well, actually, I was just thinking, I'm so glad you're interested in the sidewalks.
Yes.
Because they're ubiquitous.
I had a question about gum.
Sidewalks are everywhere. And a few years ago, I was working on a new transit system in Charlotte, North Carolina, which has miles and miles of sidewalks that everybody takes for granted, although they walk through them every day, and that's something that. So I thought, well, first of all, I was wondering why everything has to be 4 feet by 4 feet units. So I somehow sneaked in the idea of making a diagonal line between each 4-foot unit in certain areas of this miles of sidewalk, plus introduced a lot of other patterns and things that had a sort of language at bus stops and a lot of other places that people would be able to recognize where they were by things that were stamped into the concrete. So that's a kind of an immersive thing, although it has nothing to do with my personal I mean, to me, it was a great victory that I could do all this, but nobody knew about it. And, but in other sense of the sculptures, that is very important for me, particularly the levels that people negotiate, whether it's actually landscape architecture is really all about the difference between this level and 4 feet. Anyway, the project in Philadelphia, it's in downtown Philadelphia at 10th and Locust Street. You're welcome to visit anytime you're in Philadelphia. You can go there any time of day or night, and it's there. You can walk through it. But that all has to do with people, the different levels that people walk through, and how they feel if they have to climb up on an earth mound, or which they do in that particular work, if the path goes on an angle or slopes up, or if it goes straight through an alley. Those are all. So I guess when you talk about the dust of that's I've been working with that medium of just dust, yeah, solidified into different forms.
Yeah.
It seems to me a lot of your work sort of exists on the threshold where you're not sure whether it is sculpture or architecture, or has it disappeared into architecture, or is it emerging out of architecture and refiguring itself in that context. But I'm thinking of like a plaza as an architectural statement.
It's sort of neither nor.
Yeah.
Well, I think
architecture
the art, those of us who have worked in these spaces that often involve working with architects, landscape architects or other architects, hope that we're working on an edge, between a sculptural interest and that and the requirements of architecture. But it's very different for me from architecture, although I've learned a lot from architects. I mean, a great deal, and I respect them a lot. I mean, sometimes people say, oh, they cold and disinterested, but I really admire the way that they're able to deal with the rest of the world and push their ideas forward. So I hope that I'm walking on the edge there.
Yeah.
And Stephen, I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about the halftone references, which is to my mind, a certain reference to obviously commercial and sort of mass industrial techniques that emerged in the 20th century, and just what that, where that brings your work and where it might bring the
Well,
viewer.
images tend to emerge spontaneously from this distribution of dots, and I'm working on the nose. I'm trying to get a nose to kind of emerge, but it hasn't happened yet. It's a monoprint technique, essentially, and I'm using a matrix that distributes the paint in this pattern that's very close to the pattern of the halftone. I didn't set out to talk about technology or printing or anything, but this sort of fell in my lap, and I'm seeing what I can do with this fortuitous kind of tool. As an abstract painter, it's a strange thing to be, after 25 or so years, to be back in the realm of the image. I think I want to relate this now to what Alice was saying, and because Alice, as you were talking, I was thinking about how one way to think about space is of architecture or of painting is in terms of the relative immersiveness of it. One walks through your work, one feels they can step into a Stephen Westfall if they watch their step. Phillis, your spaces are very often very atmospheric and seem to open up. And I'm thinking, my paintings are different. It seems like there's a different kind of spatial situation there. They seem very, I guess, like surfaces, so they seem very, very, very on the surface.
Your paintings remind me a lot of images from the Very Large Array in New Mexico. Do you know that
Yes.
system? The radio telescope and
Right.
sound is made visual. And they feel like sound a little bit to me.
It's a sonograph effect.
Yeah.
But the
Well,
idea of
that's
space and
great.
painting
Right.
is different from sculpture or architecture. And I don't know if people want to talk about how you just did a bit, but
I just wanted to say that to me, I hear you guys talking about your work and everybody's work, and it's a language. Everybody has their own language.
true.
And so when every show we do and every artist that we show, all of us talking here, it is relative to what that language is. We show Raymond Hendler, who painted in the 60s and very Calder and Miro-like, so we can reference a lot of more representational things with him, or you see a seascape in something else. But I think for each artist, we can, abstraction means something, but there is our own language to it, so.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what I was saying about a conversation.
Yes.
Because it's one thing to have a language, and if nobody can understand it, then it's like Fraunhofer and that Balzac story. But if it's a conversation, and people with different, the amazing thing about taking up your metaphor, the amazing thing about what you see upstairs is that, yes, everybody's got their own language, and yet you can see all these cross conversations going on, pinging around like pool shots, ricocheting off the rectangle of the room. And that's really interesting. You can say, oh, that person's having a conversation with that person, and that history is having a conversation with that history.
And it's real bad if there ain't no conversation at all.
Right.
That's the thing, and I think that's why good paintings really, you guys find the language that speaks to us and to your average person that can walk into a museum or a gallery and gets that conversation. So.
Yeah, I think this, people are frightened of abstraction to this day because they feel like the boat has sailed and they're like on the shore, or that they're speaking in a language that they don't understand. And as soon as you start seeing affinities within groups of works, you start being able to construct the language for yourself in your mind, even if you're not a painter, you're just an aficionado. And that's
it's history
Yeah.
too. Everything we talk about, the representation, you look at medieval art, there are abstractions within that, and symbols and signs.
yes.
So it's funny to talk about it in that way, but I think we can see abstraction all the way through. So, even I look at Balcom Green's art, he was pure geometric, but then he shifted, we say to figuration, but it's really about planes of color for him, or just planes even almost just in tonalities. So.
I'd like to read this. It's something I came across recently in Baudelaire, who was writing in the 1860s about
she's perfect.
right about Delacroix. I guess he really got on Delacroix's nerves, from what I understand, but he put up with him as a sport about the whole thing. But Baudelaire wrote about Delacroix and talked about this very thing that we're talking about, which is the abstraction within figuration. He says, 1860, a well-drawn figure fills you with a pleasure which is absolutely divorced from its subject. Whether voluptuous or awe-inspiring, the figure will owe its entire charm to the arabesque which it cuts in space. So long as it is skillfully drawn, there is nothing, from the limbs of a martyr who is being flayed alive to the body of a swooning nymph, that does not admit of a kind of pleasure whose elements the subject matter plays no part. And then he adds, if it is otherwise with you, you're obviously either a butcher or a rake. So even as early as half a century before the what we think of as the great explosion of the great breakthroughs that you outlined, Max, in the presentation, here's Baudelaire talking about the beside the pointness of subject.
Well, so is this debate a false one in terms of abstraction versus figuration? And are we ultimately, what are your thoughts on the idea that figuration is always already an abstraction and vice versa, no matter where we take
I think
it?
it's another paradox. I'm proud to be an abstract painter, but I think the debate is a false one. I mean, I want to make that distinction. I want my work to make that distinction, but I feel the desire for the figure in the work and the ghost of its absence in the work, and the anticipation that a figure will be in front of it at various distances and moving around. That it's addressed to figures, it's addressed to the body.
Phyllis, would you like to?
That's a beautiful thought.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. Well, a lot of things went through my mind when we were talking, like you were talking about different abstraction. Is it any different than different jazz musicians? You know, I mean, they seem, abstract painting seems like a bookend to jazz and kind of developed alongside of it. I really like what you just said about the ghost of the figure is always there. If not in the painting, in the room.
I have artists now coming into the gallery, and I hesitate a little. They walk in and say, I'm so-and-so, I'm an abstract painter. And I'm like, oh my God, what happened to I'm a painter? You know, it's really shocking to me a little bit. It has shifted. I don't remember that. You know, I haven't been around forever, but I don't remember having to say, you're a painter, you're an artist. So
That sort of emphatic declaration.
yes,
of
it seems
either
to be
or.
more and more and more. And perhaps it's because we show a lot of abstract paintings, so they're trying to say, I'm with you, let's, that may
Will
be
you
it.
look at my slides?
Abstraction's pretty hot right now, you know. They
Abstraction's
want you to
great.
know.
Why do you think that might be? We just have about a minute left, and I'd hate to
The
end this
resurgence
lively
of
discussion.
abstraction.
Yeah, why? I mean, that's an interesting sort of maybe point to end, just in terms of why that might be that it is particularly hot right now.
Well, what is abstraction?
What does abstraction mean to you?
It's analog. We can talk about technology. It's an easy one to reach for, but I think there's something to that. You know, it's a surface that's there's only one of them in most cases, and
So it's almost a nostalgia.
and the light is bouncing off the surface. It's not emanating from behind the surface like
So is it almost a nostalgic impulse in the 21st century?
I think it's cyclical. It's just a cyclical thing, you know?
It represents a clarity, I think. I mean, now since there seems to be millions of art students. I mean, when I went to art school.
Wow, there really
The
is.
art world
There's
was
thousands
very
of them.
small, you know, now, and somehow.
I guess, I don't know.
Think of the ghost in the room. Well, I'm sorry, we have to cut this off because there's a bus to catch, and I'm so sorry to have to end this conversation. But thank you all for the lively conversation. If you'd please just join me in thanking them all for this wonderful conversation. Thank you all for coming this evening.